Chapter 141, Tryouts, 3. Been a while. With an awkward smile on my face, I headed towards where Jean, Amanda, and the rest were. Glancing at my group, I pretty much knew everyone apart from a certain individual. His name was Zach, I believe. Leisurely chatting with Donald, whom I was in a group with back in Hallberg. Zach was a rather skinny individual with black hair and black eyes. He was around my height, and apart from his long nose, he didn't particularly stand out. As I observed him from the distance, apart from the fact that he was in my class, I really knew nothing about him. He wasn't even in the tournament arc, therefore it was safe to say that he had failed the tryouts in my novel. Arriving before the group, I nodded my head towards Jean and Amanda, who nodded back. Thereafter, as I nodded towards Arnold, I saw him snorting and looking away from me. Looks like he still hated me. Well, not that I cared. In my eyes, he was merely putting on a show in front of Jean. Turning my attention back towards Donald, who was talking to Zach, I casually smiled as I greeted him. "Hey, Donald, been a while since I've seen you." Turning around and glancing at me, Donald's casual smile faded from his face as he nodded his head. "Oh, it's you." Noticing Donald's attitude, which was a stark contrast to what it was back in Hallberg, I couldn't help but tease him. "I see, now that I'm ranked higher than you, you're starting to be more polite, huh?" Hearing my remark, glaring at me, Donald raised his voice. "Do you want to fight, you bastard?" Raising my brow, I couldn't help but shake my head as I said, "You still won't stop calling me bastard?" "Hey, how many times did I tell you? My name is Ren. Do you want me to spell it for you? R-E-N. You think I care about your damn nom dash? Please stop." Not so far from where Donald and I were, noticing that things were about to get out of control, Amanda sighed and spoke up. Her tone was neither overbearing nor cold. She was really speechless at the moment. In a couple of minutes they would be participating in the tryouts for the Academy tournament, and yet two of their members were already fighting. Were they not nervous at all? Brushing her hair to the side, Amanda curtly said, "Please, calm down, and let's start discussing our strategy." Thereafter, as she finished speaking, Amanda expectantly looked at me. Shortly after, as if mimicking Amanda, everyone else looked in my direction. Huh? Noticing everyone staring in my direction, my brow couldn't help but twitch. What's going on? Hold up, why is everyone looking at me? Unbothered by my expression, Jean looked at me and said, "Do you not have a plan?" Glancing at Jean, after a short pause I nodded my head. "I do."
Yeah.
I did in fact have a plan. But the script wasn't supposed to go like this. I originally predicted for Jean to boss everyone around and tell them what to do, but to my surprise, he directly asked for my opinion. Damn, he really did mature a lot since the last time I saw him. Although I knew that he had changed, he was completely different from what he was a few months back. What in the world happened since the time I didn't see him? Hearing my response, Jean coldly said, "Then what is the problem?" Sigh. "No problem, no problem." As an extended sigh escaped from my mouth, lowering my voice, I pondered for a few seconds before saying, "Fine, the plan is relatively actually simple. Give the code to me and you guys do the rest." After I finished speaking, everyone looked at me strangely, evidently not understanding what I meant. Frowning, the first to voice out their confusion was Donald as he irritably asked, "What sort of plan is that? And why you?" Glancing at Donald, I raised my brow as I mockingly said, "Isn't it obvious why?" "Why?" Instead of answering immediately, I answered back with another question as I looked at everyone. "Normally if you had the code, who would you give it to?" Hearing the question, everyone started pondering. The first one to speak up was Amanda, who carefully said, "The strongest person?" Nodding towards Amanda, I answered, "That is an option, yes, but not the ideal one." With his hand on his lips, Jean frowned as he seriously asked, "Then what is the ideal one?" Staring at Jean and the others, a faint smile appeared on my lips as I explained. The ideal candidate would obviously be someone who could run fast or hide well. Since we will be inside of a random map, if we were to be put in a flat terrain, someone who can outrun the opponent so that the other team wouldn't catch up would be the most appropriate. And if the map wasn't plain but let's say filled with obstacles, someone that could hide from the enemy's prying eyes would be the most obvious candidate. Pausing, I looked at everyone and said, "You guys are following what I'm saying, right?" Staring at everyone, and seeing them nod in understanding, my eyes soon paused on a certain individual as I said, "Can you guys think of a certain individual in our group who best fits such criteria?" Hearing my words, soon everyone's attention turned towards Jean. With his arms crossed, a slight frown appeared on Jin's brows as he said, "So you want me to be bait?" Looking at Jean straight into the eyes, I nodded my head and bluntly said, "Yes, and you will be operating alone." I'm glad he caught on. With him being the most likely candidate for holding the code, chances were that the other team would mainly focus their attention on him. Therefore, if everyone was focused on him, with me holding the code, chances were that even if they caught Jean, by the time they realized he didn't have the code, it would have already been too late. Staring into my eyes for what felt like an eternity, Jean eventually looked away and nodded his head. "Fine." Smiling, I secretly nodded my head. With Jean listening to what I was saying, the chances of us successfully passing the tryouts increased. Not that I was worried, as originally Jean, Arnold, and Amanda made it past the tryouts. Well, although I now knew that things outside of the plot could happen, with the plot armor they had, chances were that they were very likely going to pass. As I was rejoicing at Jin's newfound attitude, Donald, who was quietly pondering for a while, suddenly frowned as he asked, "But what if they don't target Jean?" Hearing Donald's question, I secretly nodded my head. He wasn't as stupid as I thought he was. Good question, I've also thought about that. Yes, when I was coming up with the plan, I had already thought of this. With Jean being the obvious target, the other team could also think that it was a trap and decide to focus on us, which wouldn't be ideal. Fortunately, I had thought of this problem beforehand. Staring at Amanda, Donald, and Arnold, I smiled at them and said, "That's where you guys come into play?" Coking her head to the side as her black hair gently fell to her shoulders, Amanda's brows slightly frowned as she looked at Arnold and Donald. With a hint of doubt in her voice, she asked, "Us?" Nodding my head as I looked at both Amanda and Donald, I explained, "Yes, you both will always be within a 50-100-meter distance from Arnold. No matter what happens. Always be 50-100 meters away from him, and whenever he gets into trouble, secretly help him." As Amanda listened, her brows couldn't help but knit in a deeper frown as she asked, "Why is that?" Glancing at Amanda for a brief moment, I explained, "So that it looks like Arnold is the person that holds the code." It was simple, really. If the other team thought that Jean was not the one that carried the code, naturally it would be either one of us. Since I was the one with the code, we needed to divert their attention away from me. And if we carefully made it seem like Amanda and Donald were secretly protecting Arnold from the distance, then they would instantly assume that the one carrying the code was Arnold. Therefore, with Arnold being their primary target, I would be left alone with the code, allowing me to protect the code fairly undisturbed. Finishing my explanation, I glanced at everyone and asked, "Do you understand?" Placing his hand on his chin as he pondered, Jean eventually nodded his head. "Makes sense, I'm fine with this strategy." Thereafter, hearing Jin's confirmation, everyone nodded their heads in agreement. Me too. Me too. Smiling, I looked at them and asked. Any other questions? Thinking for a bit, Zach, who hadn't spoken since the very beginning, looked at me and said with a hint of doubt in his voice. What makes you so confident that they are not going to target you? Looking back at him, I shook my head and responded. I don't. Then what happens if they decided to target you? Target me? Smiling, I didn't respond. The answer was obvious. With Jin's arrogant character being famous throughout the whole academy, chances of me having the code were almost null to zero. In fact, I didn't even need to come up with a plan B revolving around Arnold. With Jin's character being famous, chances were that people would instantly assume he was the one holding on to the code. Still, even though I knew this, it was better to be prepared rather than being unprepared. Moreover, as we didn't know who our opponents were, it was better to not let Jin do all the work. If there was one thing I learned since being in this world, it was to always expect for the worse. As I was thinking to myself, staring at me, to Jin, Arnold, and Amanda, my unresponsiveness had a completely different meaning in their eyes. As their thoughts stopped there, one frowned, one shivered, and one sighed in relief. Not noticing the different emotions displayed on their faces as I was deep into my own thoughts, staring back at Zach, I quickly added. Either way, Zach. You and I will be responsible for finding the code from the other members. Wait, what make dash?
Beep.
All contestants, please make your way towards the virtual arena. We will be beginning with the first years. Just as I finished explaining my plan, stopping Zach mid-sentence, the loudspeaker coming from below the stadium resounded across the arena. Thereafter, hearing the announcement made by the speaker, every student wearing an azure-colored uniform headed downstairs towards the arena. Similarly, following them down with my group, I started thinking about the upcoming tryouts. With the plan set, we should be able to breeze through this. Worst case scenario, I could just expose a small portion of my strength. With 3 ranks in our team, apart from Kevin's team, I doubted that we could lose. Still, it was better to be safe rather than sorry. Thus, as my thoughts paused there, I quickly made my way down the stairs with my group. Chapter 142, Codebreaker 1. Going down the stairs, we soon found ourselves beneath the arena grounds. Inside of a large spacious room that looked to be the size of a football stadium. Glancing around, I couldn't help but be amazed by what I saw. The whole room was filled with capsules. Endless amounts of capsules. If I had to estimate, I'd say at least over a couple hundred of them. Just imagining the costs made me shudder. Observing the capsules from the distance, I took special notice of how the capsules were arranged. The capsules were grouped together in groups of 6 as they each faced outwards and were positioned in a way that they formed a circle. Behind them, large monitors with numbers displayed on the screen could be seen. Next to the capsules, people clad in white uniforms holding onto some tablets and doing regular checkups on the capsules were a common sight. Staring at the scene before me, I couldn't help but be amazed. So this was the VR arena. It was a truly spectacular sight. The machines were far bigger and more advanced than the ones in the virtual class I took at the beginning of the year with Professor Thibault. Moreover, with them being more advanced than the ones in the VR class, we didn't need to wear those tight and uncomfortable suits. Everyone, please look at me for a moment. Just as I was busy admiring the underground VR area, Instructor Sean, who was announcing moments before, appeared in the middle of the room as he gathered everyone's attention towards himself. Great! After seeing everyone turn their attention towards himself, with a satisfied smile on his face, Instructor Sean continued speaking. I will make this short. As most of you already know, you will soon be facing each other in the virtual world, and the game that you will be playing will be the Codebreaker game. Pausing and staring at all of the first years, Instructor Sean continued. Since I've already explained the rules of the game beforehand, I will not explain them again. This time, I will tell you a few of the things that you should be careful of. Raising one of his fingers, Instructor Sean said. First things first, everyone that participates in the game will have their strength suppressed to G rank by default. Pausing and noticing that a commotion was about to erupt, raising his hand and speaking louder, Instructor Sean continued speaking. Before you say anything, this was a decision that the Academy has made in the last intra-academy tournament, and there is a specific reason as to why we chose to do it that way. In short, it's so that we can see the students' actual skills instead of just watching them dominating the opponents through ranks. This is so that we can provide a fair. As I listening to Instructor Sean speak, a frown involuntarily appeared on my face. This completely changed the playing field. Right now, the chances of us winning diminished by a lot. Although Jean and Amanda were skilled, if the opponents played their cards well, we could very well lose this game if we were not careful enough. Still, I believe it was still safe to continue with the plan that I had previously proposed, as it didn't particularly focus on brute forcing our way towards the opponent. Moreover, as soon as they would spot Jean, they would immediately realize who they were up against. After all, Jean was famous in the first years. From there, the plan should proceed as I had mentioned. Thinking thus far, I couldn't help secretly sigh in relief. Good thing Jean changed. Just imagining what would have happened if he selfishly did everything by himself almost caused me to have endless headaches. Another thing that you must take notice of when in the game is that you won't know who your opponents are until the very last moment. This was decided by the Academy beforehand to make this more realistic. Because when you are fighting against opponents in real life, chances are that you will know nothing about them as. Listening to Instructor Sean speaking, I couldn't help but nod my head. What he said was absolutely true. Unless you were actively seeking the opponent, if someone attacked you, chances were that you knew nothing about them. Thus, this was a great idea by the Academy as it made the test more realistic. And that's why we decided to do it this way. Pausing there and staring at some of the students who seemed to have grown more nervous due to the new developments, Instructor Sean smiled kindly and said, "Don't worry, take this as a good experience for the future. Even if you don't pass, you may use this as an experience for when you graduate from the Academy. If you get nervous from just this, then how are you going to react when you enter the real world?" Stopping there, Instructor Sean smiled and pointed towards the capsules nearby. "All right, enough said, please make your way to your capsules. Your group and names should be on one of the monitors above the capsules. Best of luck." Finished with what he wanted to say, Instructor Sean glanced at the students for a brief moment before going back upstairs. He still needed to host the tryouts. Shortly after Instructor Sean left, all of the first years dispersed and made their way towards their designated capsules. Imitating them, I along with my group members, started looking around and checked to see where our group was designated. As we walked around in hopes of finding our designated capsules, we had to be careful to not trip on the thick metal wires that extended from the VR machines. They appeared everywhere and extended from the capsules like spider webs. Here. A couple of minutes into the search, waving his hand, Zach pointed towards a set of capsules next to him. Shortly after, as we all arrived before the capsules, an instructor wearing a white uniform came up to us. Wearing thick-framed glasses, the instructor stared at the tablet in his hand for a couple of seconds before briefly glancing at us. "You guys must be the group from Class S24, correct?" Nodding his head, Donald responded for the rest of us. "Yes, that's correct." Moving his head down and staring at us through the upper gap of his glasses, after a couple of seconds, the instructor turned his attention back onto his tablet and proceeded to say, "Okay, please enter the virtual machines." Vuam. Shua. Thereafter, pressing onto his tablet, steam slowly started rising from the VR capsules next to us as the lid slowly lifted upwards. Seeing the capsules open, without hesitation, we quickly sat in the capsules. The capsule I was in was beside Donald and Amanda, who quickly sat down, to which I followed suit. Hoo. After I comfortably positioned myself inside of my capsule, I took a deep breath. Thereafter, staring at my group members next to me for a brief moment, I carefully placed the helmet on my head. Soon my vision turned dark. Turning on the VR simulation. The tryouts will begin as soon as you spawn in the map. As my vision was dark, I heard the instructor's voice ring next to my ears. Shortly after I heard the instructor's voice, I slowly lost consciousness. Simulation initiating, best of luck. Schwa. Processing student information. Retina scan, check. Fingerprint scan, check. Genetic data test, check. Loading time, 57%, 87%, 94%. User information loaded. Rank 197, Rendover, confirm access Y/N. As I regained consciousness, opening my eyes, the first thing I saw were rows upon rows of blue texts. Thereafter, taking a minute to adjust my mind to the sudden changes, I looked through the information and pressed Y. As I had already experienced this once, I wasn't as overwhelmed as I was before, 4 months ago. After confirming, abruptly, a lively jingle began playing as it echoing through my ears. Soon after, the world around me started changing as buildings and roads started constructing themselves around me. Gradually, as time passed and the world around me started to become clearer, I could see the faint outline of a city appearing before me as the buildings that appeared from beneath the ground gradually started obstructing my vision. As I was watching the world around me construct, a frown soon appeared on my face. This wasn't a regular city. As the outline of the buildings next to me started to become more clear, I could see that they were all worn down and broken. Rubbles and broken glass appeared all over the streets, and moss and vines covered some of the buildings in the distance. This looked just like a post-apocalyptic ghost city. Completely deserted and worn down. Almost like Chernobyl back on Earth after the nuclear power plant incident. Looking up at the sky, I could see that the sky was covered by thick gray clouds with a sparse amount of sunlight making its way down the abandoned city. Schwa. Schwa. Shortly after, as I was staring at the city before me, appearing next to me were Arnold, Amanda, and the rest. Opening his eyes, Donald was the first to speak up as he looked around in confusion. What map is this? Glancing at Donald and then the city, with her hand on her chin, Amanda pondered for a little bit before curtly responding. Judging from the infrastructures of the buildings, it seems like we are back in the past. Right after the first cataclysm. It is indeed that. Staring at Amanda, I nodded my head. Having been born in the 1980s back on Earth, I could tell that this map was set during that time as some of the infrastructures were similar to my memories of my childhood. Turning towards Jean, I nodded my head and flashed the watch on my wrist. Jean, you know what to do. Make sure you report everything that you see. Without responding, Jean nodded his head and disappeared from where he was standing. Schwa. Staring at where Jean used to be, I turned to look at Amanda and the others. We proceed as planned. If possible, try taking out your opponent when you meet them, and always make sure you keep in touch in case something goes wrong. Nodding their heads, Amanda and Donald looked at Arnold, who snorted and left in the opposite direction as Jean. It was evident that he was dissatisfied with the fact that I was the one arranging the plans. Still, since Jean was complying, he could only hold back and do as I said. Moments after I finished speaking, Donald and Amanda separated themselves from Arnold, who moved around the city by himself. Just as I had previously mentioned, they stayed within a 50-meter radius of him. Staring at Amanda, Donald, and Arnold's figures disappearing in the distance for a couple of seconds, turning my attention back towards Zach, I softly said. All right, we should get moving too. Chapter 143, Codebreaker, 2. This place is fine. Entering one of the abandoned buildings with Zach, I made sure to scan the perimeter to see if anybody was there before setting up camp. After settling down, still standing, Zach looked at me in confusion as he asked, "What do we do now?" In all honesty, if not for everyone following his orders, Zach would have never have let someone like Ren order him around. He really was tempted to just leave and do as he wished, but since it would incur the wrath of the other team members, he decided against doing so. Glancing at Zach from the corner of my eye and reading his thoughts, I briefly responded to him before turning my attention back towards the distance. Nothing yet, our turn has yet to come. From the very beginning, I could tell he was dissatisfied with me. However, unfortunately for him, I really didn't care. In the first place, who told him that he had to do as I said? Inwardly shaking my head and turning my attention back towards the city, I carefully observed the city from the building I was on. For now, everything was calm and quiet, however, I knew that things would soon change. Placing my hand on my chin, squinting my eyes as I stared into the distance, I fell into deep thought. According to my deduction, whoever was going to target Jean was definitely not going to be the code holder. With how skilled Jean was, sending their code holder to fight against him would be suicide and may prove to be fruitless. Thus it was safe to assume that whoever was going to target Jean was definitely not going to be the code holder. Preferably, I would hope that they send more than one person to pursue him, as that would cut off a lot of possibilities, but even one was enough. Couldn't be too greedy. Now, with that set, I needed to figure something out. Was the code holder going to hide, or was she going to blend with the rest just like what I had done with Arnold? Thinking thus far, glancing at my watch, I immediately dialed a number. Fortunately, we were allowed to communicate with each other during the game, as both teams were given access to a communication device in the form of a watch. It couldn't do anything else apart from that, but it saved a lot of time. "Jean, can you hear me?" Swoosh. Stealthily moving around the abandoned houses, Jean quietly scanned the perimeter. Thereafter, like a cat, Jean kept moving forward without making any sound. Fast and stealthily. "Jean, can you hear me?" As Jean arrived on top of one of the buildings, suddenly his watch vibrated. Briefly halting his steps and hearing Ren's voice, a slight frown appeared on Jin's face before it quickly disappeared. Tapping on the screen of his smartwatch, Jean coldly answered. "Yes." "All right, perfect. I need you to expose yourself so that the other group is aware of your existence." Closing his eyes, Jean didn't respond immediately. Thereafter, understanding the intent behind Ren's words, Jean nodded his head. "Understood. All right, perf dash." Click. Turning off the watch, without giving a chance for Ren to respond, Jean quickly jumped higher until he was at the roof of the buildings. Thereafter, he jumped from one building to the other. As he moved, he made sure to be as overbearing and fearless as possible. Since he knew about his personality, if he acted according to how others thought he would, chances that they would think he was the bait would reduce. If not for the fact that he was following Ren's plan, Jean would have originally done the mission like this. After all, how could others match him in a fight? He was that confident in himself. Swoosh. Swoosh. As Jean moved from one building to the other, he suddenly felt an extremely repulsive feeling well inside of his body. His mind couldn't help but start drifting away from the trials as a result. Shortly after, recalling something, Jin's fist clenched tightly. To think he was following someone else's order. He, Jean Horton, the proud son of the Horton family, was following someone else's order. How repulsive. Those were the words that subconsciously came out of his mouth as he kept moving forward. Never in his life had he ever had someone order him around. Never. If not for the fact that the person he was being ordered by had already beaten him, Jean was never going to follow his orders. Suddenly, as his thoughts paused there, Ren's face appeared in Jin's mind. More specifically, the cold and emotionless eyes back in Hallberg. He never forgot that moment. Nor will he ever forget that day. The day where he truly felt powerless for the first time in his life. Although Jean hated Ren, that moment back in Hallberg had taught him a lesson. That was to never be too conceited, as there was always someone better than you. Still, just because he lost didn't mean he feared Ren. No, that innate pride that had been engraved deeply into his body since birth couldn't just vanish like that. Scared over a single defeat? Pathetic. He wasn't as weak-willed as that. Hoo. Exhaling as turbid air escaped from his mouth, Jean accelerated as he quickly moved around the buildings. Ever since that fateful day in Hallberg, Jean had set his mind. Be it Kevin, Amanda, Melissa, or Ren. He no longer cared for them. He had realized that he was too fixated on the idea of comparing himself to others rather than just focusing on himself. Thinking of how was currently holding back and working with the others, something that he would have never done before, Jean couldn't help but mutter to himself. How disgusting. He wanted nothing more but to quickly get this over with. The feeling of working with other people rather than just himself repulsed him to the max. The only reason he was doing this was because he believed that he could learn something from Ren. However, as he moved around the buildings, Jean couldn't help but feel like that was the wrong decision. How could being a bait help him in any way, shape, or form? Damn it. Gritting his teeth, Jean increased his pace even more as he overbearingly moved around the infrastructures around him. Staring at his surroundings as he moved, he coldly spat. Since my job is to attract the attention of the others, that's just what I'll do. Standing on top of a building, a youth with long black hair and deep green eyes was currently staring at the city before him. With his watch close to his mouth, the youth softly muttered. Have you spotted the enemies yet? The youth's name was John Redgrave, and he was currently the leader of his team representing Class S24. Being the leader of his group, John took responsibility for his group and was the one responsible for coming up with the team strategy. Currently, they were inside of what seemed to be a post-apocalyptic ghost town. Since he wasn't familiar with the enemy nor the environment, his first order was to split into 3 groups of 2 to scan the perimeter in hopes of finding the enemy team. He had to get a better idea of who their enemy was and their precise location. Moreover, considering the fact that everyone's strength was the same, John felt more reassured. But he still didn't let his guard down. Recalling something, he softly mumbled to himself as a hint of worry appeared in his voice. I just hope we aren't against those monsters from Class S25. If it was them, John wasn't too sure on how to proceed. Especially against the first-year rank 1, Kevin Voss. If they were up against him, he really couldn't foresee any chance of victory. Captain, I've spotted someone, but it's not good news. After 10 minutes of silence, John's watch vibrated. Thereafter, as he heard the message, John's heart couldn't help but sink. Could it be that they were truly against Kevin? Was his luck really that bad? Expecting the worst, John looked at the watch, softly said. What's the bad news? After a short 5-second pause that seemed to last for an eternity, the voice on the other side of the watch responded. It's Jean Horton. Hearing the name, John froze for a second. Thereafter, a frown emerged in his brows as he thought for a bit. After a couple of minutes, the frown on John's brows lessened as he thought to himself. If it's Jean Horton, then things may actually be easier than I thought. Shortly after, as the gear of John's mind moved, a smile appeared on his face as he quickly turned on his watch and sent a few commands. All right, I want you to track him from far. Make sure you keep a close eye on him and don't for a single second lose sight of him, understood? Roger. Click. Thereafter, turning off his watch, a smile appeared on John's face as he thought to himself. We might be able to win this. Chapter 144, Code Breaker, 3. Receiving words of Jin's sighting in the distance, John's first thought was to immediately send everyone and attack him. The reason was obvious, considering Jin's personality and strength, the most obvious candidate for being the code holder would obviously be him. With his strength and agility, he could just outrun everyone. However, after a bit of thinking, John refrained from doing so. This could very well be a smokescreen. Although that was the most obvious course of action, Jin wasn't stupid. He could very well be trying to act as bait. Biting his nails out of habit, John thought to himself. Is Jin really the one holding on to the code? That was the most logical conclusion John could think of. After all, Jin was famous for being proud and arrogant. He being the code holder was a very real possibility. However, John still hesitated. Eventually, he shook his head. He needed more information before deciding on the right course of action. Beep. Just as John was immersed in his own thoughts, his watch vibrated. Thereafter, John heard one of his teammates' voices coming from the speaker of the watch. Captain, spotted someone on the west side. Hearing this piece of news, John's brows furrowed slightly as he carefully asked. Dante, do you know the identity of the individual? Unsure. Wait, I'm getting a closer look. Yes, be careful and don't get spotted. Make sure you keep a safe distance from them. Nodding his head, John warned Dante, his teammate, in advance. If the other team found out that they had a visual of them, their advantage would immediately disappear. They had to be extra careful. Roger that. Turning off his watch as he waited for Dante to respond, John's brows furrowed as he fell into deep thought. Before the tryouts started, John had looked through the list of students that he had to watch out for. Therefore, as soon as he knew Jin was one of the people present, he already knew the general composition of the opposite team. From what he recalled, the other team comprised of Jin, Amanda, Arnold, Donald, Zach, and Ren. Apart from Jin, Amanda, and Arnold, John wasn't very wary of the other three. To him, they were extras. Nothing worth taking note of. Therefore, his current focus was now on finding out the whereabouts of Amanda and Arnold. Once he had a read on them, he could come up with an appropriate plan. Beep. A couple of minutes since Dante last contacted him, John suddenly felt a vibration on his wrist. Quickly turning on the watch, John seriously asked. You've got something? Captain, Dante here, I've got a visual. According to what I can see, Arnold is walking by himself. Arnold? Wait, are you sure? Affirmative. Hearing Arnold's name being mentioned, rather than being happy, John's frown deepened. That was because he wasn't with Jin. Since he had investigated the group in advance, he knew who Arnold was. Jin's lackey. The real question was, why was he by himself? However, before he could think any further, Dante's voice raised a few pitches, resulting in John snapping out of his thoughts. No, wait, Captain, it seems like there is someone else a fair distance from him. No, there are two people quietly moving next to him. If not for the fact that I am using my skill, I don't think I would have spotted them. Can you get a visual? I am not sure because I am too far, but I see the silhouette of a girl and a boy. A girl and a boy? Are you sure? Affirmative. All right, that's enough. Keep a close watch and make sure you don't lose sight of them. Click. Turning off his watch, John's mind raced. Since there was only one girl in the group, John could already figure out the identity of one of the two individuals around Arnold. Amanda Stern. Someone that was on par with the likes of Jin. However, John wasn't too worried. Since everyone's strength was the same, it shouldn't be too difficult to defeat her if they ganged up on her. Moreover, she was an archer. If they ambushed her from a close distance, she was probably the easiest member to defeat. "Captain, it's me Roman, I've got a visual on the other two members." Just as a plan started formulating in John's mind, he suddenly heard another one of his teammates contact him. Pausing his thoughts, he carefully asked, "Where are they?" "They are at the center making their way towards the pillar." "Towards the pillar?" Hearing the piece of news, placing his hand on his chin, John fell into deep thought. Thereafter, he smiled. "All right, I've got the gist of the situation." Clenching his fist tightly, John quickly ordered, "Send Sarah and Bob on the east side where Jean is. Tell them that all they have to do is buy time. Don't let them fight against Jean at any cost, the rest go attack the trio in the distance." "Understood, but what about the other two members of the opposite team?" "Don't worry about them, they are merely cannon fodder. Even if they are aware that their teammates are being ambushed, they won't be able to make it in time to reinforce them." "Humph." Those two were obviously ordered to go to the pillar and wait there for them to place the code once they defeated the other team. How arrogant of them. Their intention was obvious from the start. Thus John didn't even bother giving those two a spare thought as he chose to directly split into a group of two. One to hold back Jean, the other to attack and snatch the code from Arnold. Snorting, a smile appeared on John's face. "Your arrogance is going to be your downfall. To think that they were so confident in their win that they just directly sent two of their members towards his team pillar, which was a fair distance from where Jean and Arnold currently were. By the time his group attacked Arnold's group and Jean, it would take too much time for them to assist them. Furthermore, even if Arnold didn't have the code, with 3 members gone, victory was still well within his grasps." The more John thought about it, the more his heart started beating due to the excitement. Victory never seemed so close in John's eyes. "John, will we be all right?" As John was starting to gain more and more confidence in his deduction, he suddenly heard Dante's worried voice coming from the speaker of the watch. Feeling the worry in Dante's voice, John smiled as he reassured him. "Don't worry, although I have the code, I will be careful when engaging against them. This is going to be a 4 versus 3 scenario. No matter how strong they are, with our strengths being relatively similar, we should be able to defeat them quickly. Moreover, we will be ambushing them. If we catch them off guard, chances of us winning would be increasing exponentially." "I understand." Click. Turning off his watch, John stared into the east side as he thought to himself, "Oh Jean, although you are talented, it seems like you aren't very good at coming up with strategies. I guess you only amount to this much." Pausing his thoughts there, John smiled as he quickly jumped off the building he was on and sped towards the west side where Arnold and his group were. This was going to be his victory. 15M, 31S. 15 minutes, should be about time. Checking my watch as I moved forward, my footsteps halted. Thereafter, as I looked at Zach, who was behind me for a brief moment, I tapped on my watch and contacted Jean. If my guess wasn't wrong, the other team should have already made their move. "Jean, what's the situation?" "2 on me." As I thought. They really had made their move. All right. Click. Turning off my watch as I nodded my head, I quickly got in contact with Amanda to get a read on their situation. "Amanda, what's the situation with you guys?" After a short pause, Amanda's crisp and pleasant voice echoed from the speakers of the watch. The loud sound of metal clashing could be heard in the background. "4 people on us." All right. Click. Turning off my watch, I sighed in relief as a smile appeared on my face. It seems like they've taken the bait. Turning my attention back towards Zach, I pointed towards the large black metal pillar in the distance and ordered, Zach, go to the pillar and wait for me to tell you the code. Taken aback, Zach looked at me. His voice couldn't help but raise a few pitches as he asked. Why me? What about you? Deeply staring at Zach straight into his eyes, I answered him in a firm tone. Just do it, trust me. Regarding me, just go, you don't have to worry. I will take responsibility for everything. Staring at me for a couple of seconds, only after Zach heard that I was going to take full responsibility that he finally relented and nodded his head. Shortly after, just like I had ordered him, he made his way towards the pillar in the distance. A moment after Zach left, turning around, I quickly activated my movement art, drifting steps, and took a step forward. Thereafter, my speed increased with each step I took. Feeling the virtual wind brush past my skin, a faint smile appeared on my lips as I quickly moved towards where Arnold and Amanda were. If my deductions were correct, I was currently being underestimated. Just like I had predicted, they probably assumed Arnold was the code holder. Moreover, if my guess wasn't wrong, the reason why they sent no one to obstruct Zach and I was because they thought nothing of us and that they were confident in defeating Arnold before we could arrive and reinforce them. The more I thought about it, the funnier the situation became. Rather than being angry, I was actually quite relieved. This just meant that no one was paying attention to me. That was good, this was exactly what I wanted. Low-key. Plus, if they actually thought I couldn't help Arnold and the rest on the time, they had grossly miscalculated. I had already predicted this scenario beforehand. Since the very start, they were playing within the palm of my hand. Chapter 145, Codebreaker, 4. Swoosh. Quietly moving around the buildings, Amanda made sure to always be within a 100 to a 50-meter radius of Arnold. Just as Ren had told her. Along the way, she, along with Donald, made sure to only subtly hide their presence. Just about enough so that the opposing team could spot them if they used a skill or looked carefully. This was one of the things Ren had specifically told her to do. Honestly, this was much harder than Amanda thought it was because if she was too obvious the other team would notice that something was wrong, and if she hid too well, the other team wouldn't find her and thus be unable to deduce that Arnold was the code holder. What a troubling situation. Still, since Amanda said she would do it, she tried her best. Gripping tightly onto the handle of her bow, Amanda glanced at Arnold below her and quietly climbed higher up in the buildings. However, just as she was about to reach the top of the building, sensing something, Amanda shifted her head to the right as the silver body of a blade flew past her. Swoosh! Narrowly avoiding the blade by a hairbreadth, Amanda suddenly somersaulted backward as the tip of a spear penetrated the area she was previously in. Gotcha! Whilst still in the air, with a cold face, Amanda extended the string of her bow. Shortly after, as two blue translucent arrows materialized on her bow, she caught sight of two individuals, one with a spear and one with a blade. She soon released the string of the bow. Swoosh! Swoosh! Like a bullet, the two arrows split the air as they quickly made their way towards the two individuals. Clank! Clank! Staring at the incoming arrows, standing in front of the individual holding onto the blade, the spear user, using the body of the spear, quickly rotated the spear in his hand and a whistle arose. Thereafter, the loud sound of metal clashing reverberated across the surroundings. KHHH. Taking a couple of steps back, the spear user couldn't help but grunt as he felt the impact of the arrows clashing against his spear. Staring at Amanda in the distance, the spear user, John Redgrave, couldn't help but say, "Damn, you're just as strong as the rumors say." Softly landing on the ground, Amanda coldly glanced at the two individuals before her. Skilled. That's the first thought that came into Amanda's mind as she stared at the two of them. Although the clash had only lasted for a brief moment, from the way they coordinated and how they managed to quickly react to her arrows, the duo was definitely not simple. Unbothered by Amanda's unresponsiveness, staring at the youth next to him that wore small-framed glasses and had short blonde hair, John moved forward as he once again thrust his spear towards Amanda. "Dante, cover me." Thereafter, synchronizing with John, the other youth called Dante leaped forward like a leopard and quickly arrived beside Amanda. "Gotcha!" With John's spear aimed at Amanda's face, Dante followed up by slashing towards her waist. Like this, Amanda suddenly found herself in a disadvantageous situation as the flow of the battle was currently in the duo's hands. Although she was avoiding most of the attacks coming from the duo thanks to her flexibility and agility, from time to time, she would use the frame of her bow to defend against some of the incoming attacks, resulting in the loud sound of metal clashing. Clank! Clank! The loud sound of metal clashing resounded across the space where Amanda was in. "You're pretty good, but for how long can you keep up?" Staring at Amanda, John smiled as he increased the intensity of his attacks. Dante followed suit. Thus, for the next minute or so, as Amanda fought with the duo, the longer they fought, the more she found herself at a disadvantage as her hands started to become numb with every single clash. Frowning, Amanda could only grit her teeth and try her best to dodge and counterattack whenever she had the opportunity. Swoosh! Swoosh! Although Amanda was strong, because she was currently fighting in close quarters, her real advantage was taken away from her. It seems like her opponents knew her weakness well. Swoosh! As she once again narrowly avoided the spear and blade coming from her front and left side, Amanda quickly glanced towards Arnold and Donald in the distance. She wanted to see how their situation was. And what she saw made her heart sink. Both Arnold and Donald were currently in a similar situation to hers. Although it seemed like Arnold wanted to help her, his opponent seemed to be constantly harassing him from the distance. It had to be noted that the opponent Arnold was currently facing was a bow user just like Amanda. Arnold's worst enemy and weakness. Although the archer that was attacking Arnold was nowhere near as skilled as Amanda, because Arnold didn't have any long-ranged attacking methods, he was currently unable to do anything. Thus, although Arnold wasn't hurt from any of the arrows coming in his way, because he was constantly being kite, he was unable to come to help her. Seeing this, glancing to her right in Donald's direction, Amanda saw him fighting against another person. His situation seemed to be a little bit better than Arnold's, however, it still wasn't good as it seemed like he was evenly matched with the opponent. The battle would definitely not be decided anytime soon. Gotcha! Thrusting his spear toward Amanda, John shouted. "Where are you looking around for when your opponents are right in front of you?" Narrowly avoiding the spear, Amanda turned right as a blade slashed in the direction of where she was previously standing. Clank! Clank! As John and Dante once again increased the intensity of their attacks, briefly glancing at Arnold and Donald below, a triumphant smirk appeared on John's lips as he looked at Amanda and said, "Everything is going just as planned, your teammates won't be able to help you anytime soon. Moreover, with Jean and your reinforcements being too far from your location, the only option you have is to lose." The more he fought, the greater the excitement John felt. He was finally going to do it. He was finally going to beat the arrogant Jean Horton and the cold Princess Amanda. He was going to accomplish a feat that no one thought he could have ever achieved before. The more he thought about it, the more excited John became. After this, everyone will definitely remember who he was. John Redgrave. Coldly staring at John, Amanda indifferently muttered, "You talk too much." Bam! Seeing that the current situation couldn't go on, stomping her feet on the ground as fine miniature crevices appeared on the ground beneath her foot, Amanda distanced herself from the duo. Thereafter pulling the string of her bow towards her lips, a blue hue surrounded her body. Voom! Shortly after, in a matter of a couple of seconds, the glow around her body intensified at an alarming rate. She was prepared to end things quickly. Staring at Amanda in the distance, opening his eyes wide, John cursed as he shouted.
Shh!
*T, she's using a skill, stop her. Coldly looking at the duo, Amanda softly said. Too late. Swoosh. Releasing the string of the bow, Amanda's arrow shot down like a comet hurtling towards the duo as the arrow's velocity reached its limits. Even though Amanda's rank was suppressed to G rank, that didn't change her proficiency in her arts nor her skills. Apollo's Descent. A skill that enables the user to conglomerate the mana in the atmosphere towards the tip of her arrow, releasing along an arrow that could devastate anything within INT's vicinity upon contact. High mana consumption. Crap. Staring at the arrow hurtling towards them like a fallen star, John couldn't help but curse out loud. Thereafter, seeing that he couldn't do anything about the situation, gritting his teeth, he briefly looked at Dante before softly saying, Dante, you know what to do. Staring at John, a faint smile appeared on Dante's lips before he quickly ran towards the arrow. As he moved closer towards the arrow, he couldn't help but laugh out loud as he looked at John before shouting. Once this is over, you better buy me dinner at the restaurant of my choice or you ca. Thereafter, as Dante moved towards the arrow, a massive yellow hue revolved around his body, creating some form of shield around him. Shortly after, before he could finish speaking, John suddenly saw Dante's body colliding with the arrow. Boom! As the arrow came into contact with Dante's body, a huge explosion reverberated across the surroundings as the windows and the already worn-down buildings started crumbling down. Standing on the ground, John found himself completely unharmed as the area he was in was completely unscathed, at least for a couple of seconds. Shortly after, John saw Dante's body slowly turned into light particles as he disappeared into the air. Your teammate Dante has died. Gritting his teeth, ignoring the blue text that appeared in his vision, John tried his best to ignore the situation and activated his movement art. Thereafter, he appeared right next to Amanda and thrusted his spear towards her. Gotcha. Ha. Caught off guard, barely reacting on time, using her bow, Amanda managed to block the attack. However, due to the sheer amount of force and strength put into the attack, Amanda's body flew and crushed against a wall. Bam! Feeling her back crash against the hard wall, Amanda couldn't help but groan out loud as she let go of her bow. KHH. A couple of seconds after she hit the wall, letting out another pained groan, Amanda was left in a daze. As her eyes regained a bit of clarity, staring at her bow that was a few meters away from her, Amanda tried to move towards it. However, before she could get close to it, a foot stepped on it and kicked it towards the opposite direction of where she was, causing her heart to sink. Not so fast. Arriving before Amanda, after he made sure to kick her bow as far away from her as possible, with the tip of his spear pointed toward her face, John ferociously glared at her. It's over. Staring at the sharp tip of the spear, Amanda froze on the spot. Thereafter, understanding the situation, Amanda lowered her head in defeat. She had failed. Although this wasn't the first time Amanda had failed in her life, the bitter aftertaste of her loss made her unable to say anything. She was too arrogant. Never had she expected her opponent to willingly sacrifice one of his teammates just to defeat her. She was too complacent and arrogant. She had let her achievements get to her. Had this been a real battle, she would have died for real. As her thoughts paused there, Amanda closed her eyes and waited for the opponent to finish her. Ignoring Amanda, turning around and glancing below him, John soon caught sight of Arnold and Donald still being in the same situation as before. Humph, it's over. Turning his attention back towards Amanda, who still had her eyes closed, John strengthened his grip on the spear. Thereafter he slowly started speaking. As he spoke, his voice became louder with each word he spoke. You see, we may not be as talented as you guys are, but that doesn't mean we don't want to win. You probably think we're crazy, sacrificing one of our teammates just to win against you guys. But that doesn't matter. This is the drive that we lower-ended people have. We will do anything in our power to win. You and Jin's arrogance is what caused your downfall. Blame yourselves for losing. As he spoke, staring at Amanda who had her eyes closed throughout the whole time, John realized that his opponent wasn't listening. Thus, raising his spear in the air, John prepared to finish off Amanda. This is then end 4. Bam! However, just as John was about to thrust his spear towards Amanda, in the distance, a loud explosion reverberated across the surroundings. Thereafter, appearing next to Donald, Ren's smiling figure could be seen holding onto a youth by the edge of his collar. He soon turned into light particles. Your teammate Nicholas has died. Briefly staring at Arnold and Amanda, Ren couldn't help but say.
Hmm.
Am I perhaps interrupting? Chapter 146, Codebreaker, 5. Am I perhaps interrupting? As light yellow particles flew in the air, I stared at Arnold and Amanda in the distance. Soon my eyes interlocked with Amanda's. Noticing her situation, my brows slightly furrowed. The situation was a lot worse than I had imagined. According to my prediction, considering her skills, she should have been evenly matched against her opponents, yet why was she on the ground on the verge of losing? Waking up from his stupor, staring at me, John flusteredly said as his mind raced. Why oh you, who are you? What's going on? How did he make it all the way here from the center of the map? According to his calculations, it would have taken 10 minutes to make it from there to here from the center of the map with a decent movement art, yet, not even 5 minutes after they ambushed Arnold's group, and reinforcements had already come? What was going on? Ignoring John, who was currently flustered, Amanda's eyes interlocked with mine. Thereafter, without me needing to say anything, Amanda capitalized on the moment when John was distracted due to my appearance and quickly moved her head away from the tip of his spear and quickly dashed towards where her bow was located. You, where do you think you're going? Noticing Amanda's action, recollecting himself and glaring at her, John quickly raised his spear and prepared to thrust it at her exposed back. Gotcha! Hearing the sound of the air being split due to the spear thrust, Amanda didn't stop moving. She knew that Ren had her back, and she wasn't wrong. Swoosh! Just as the spear was about to stab her right in the back, pointing in her direction from the opposite building, a translucent yellow ring quickly headed in her direction and directly stopped right before the tip of the spear. Clank! A shockwave swept the surroundings as the ring came in contact with the tip of the spear. Debris and dust flew everywhere as a consequence of the impact. Not long after, as the ring and the spear were locked in a stalemate, the ring slowly lost its luster and the spear soon broke through it. However, it was already too late. Picking up her bow, Amanda quickly turned around. With an arrow materializing in her hand, without hesitation, she quickly pulled the string of her bow until it touched her lips before releasing it. Swoosh! Like a shooting star, the arrow coursed through the air as it hurtled in John's direction at an unimaginable speed. It was so fast that a blue line could be seen tracing the path of where the arrow traveled.
Shh!
*T. Opening his eyes wide, John tried his best to evade the arrow, however, it was already too late. Brushing past the body of the spear, the arrow quickly pierced through John's right chest area. Thereafter, John found himself helplessly thrown all the way to the other side of the building as his body crashed against one of the walls. Bomb! Kaha! As his back crashed against the wall, John couldn't help but groan out loud as spit escaped from his mouth. His mind blanked for a couple of seconds. KHHH. A couple of seconds after John collided against the wall, as his mind regained some clarity, he heard the sound of soft footsteps headed towards his direction. Step! Step. Walking in John's direction as she coldly looked at him, Amanda's brows were tightly knit. She wasn't happy. Although she had won. That didn't change the fact that she had still lost moments before. Staring at Ren standing on the opposite building to hers, Amanda didn't say anything. Had he not come on time, she would have already lost. But that wasn't what made her bitter. No, what made her bitter was the fact that everything went according to Ren's plan and yet she still lost. She had been warned beforehand of such a situation happening. He had specifically told her that she would be attacked first and that at least 2 people were going to attack her, she knew, and yet her arrogance led to her downfall. Ren had told her to just stall for time, yet she did the opposite. She thought that she could win, but it seems like she was wrong. She was still too naive. Staring at John who was right before her, Amanda's feet paused. She still had a lot to learn. I'm possible. Snapping Amanda out of her thoughts, was John's angry yet bitter voice. With his arms down, John weakly looked up towards Amanda. Thereafter, shifting his head to the right, John found a tangible blue arrow puncturing his body, right where his heart was. Shortly after, to his sadness and bitterness, John found his body slowly turn into yellow particles. Cough. As he watched his body turn into particles, coughing a couple of times, John couldn't help but softly mutter in a bitter tone. Cough, cough, I'm possible. How could I have lost? Everything went according to my plan, it should have been perfect, yet why am I losing? Happened? His plan should have been perfect. He was so close to beating Amanda and from there winning the whole game. He was going to be hailed as a hero right after this. He could have already imagined his whole class looking at him in reverence once he returned triumphantly. Yet, just when his dream was about to come into fruition, appearing out of nowhere and foiling everything was the youth standing in the opposite building. Turning his head to the right, with jet black hair and deep blue eyes, the youth in the opposite building was currently aiding Arnold, who with the help of his strange rings that stopped his spear attack previously, managed to close the distance with his team member. The bow user. Seeing this, John knew that they had lost. With one last struggle, staring at the youth who had jet black hair and blue eyes, John raised his voice as he weakly shouted. Tell me, how did you make it here this quick? He had to know. He wanted to know how he was defeated. His plan should have been perfect, yet at the very last moment, he lost. Just where did he miscalculate? Hearing John's voice, turning my attention back towards him, I looked at him strangely. Haven't you ever heard of something called a movement art? Well, that was only part of the reason as to why I managed to aid Amanda and the rest quickly. Although yes, my movement art was indeed the reason as to why I made it here this fast, it wasn't the most critical point. Since I had predicted the opponent's decision beforehand, just when we spawned in this map, I had already told Amanda and the others the area in which they were to move. Like this, I didn't need to go to the trouble of looking for them on this enormous map as I already had an idea of which area they were going to be in. Moreover, as they were fighting, all I needed to do was head in the direction of where the sound of them fighting was coming from to get an accurate location of where they were. This allowed me to save a lot of time. Though I really do have to say, our opponents weren't half bad. Although they had moved according to my wishes, I didn't expect them to be this strong. I was genuinely impressed. You dash. Unsatisfied with the answer, John was about to rebuke, but just as he was about to speak up, his body suddenly turned into light particles before a blue text appeared in front of his eyes. You have died. Thereafter, as John's body disappeared, what replaced it was a white card that emanated a golden hue. Swoosh. Subsequently, bending over and picking up the card, after a brief glance, Amanda flicked her wrist and threw the card in my direction. Thanks. Catching the card, I quickly looked through the contents of the card. Shortly after, turning on my watch, I called Zach, who should have been waiting near the pillar. Hey, Zach, are you there? After a short pause, Zach responded.
Yeah,
I'm currently standing in front of the pillar. Do you have the code? Yup, it's 204-1689. 204-1689. Yup. Alright, I'm putting it in. Click. After telling Zach the code, turning off the call, I quickly glanced at the time. 05M, 36S. 5 minutes to spare. Not bad. Just in the nick of time. Had I come a little bit later, this would have ended in a draw. Smiling, I quickly tapped on the screen of my watch and called Gene. Since I didn't get notified of his death, he should still be fine, no? On the opposite side of where Ren was located, in the Easter area, feeling his watch vibrate, Gene heard Ren's voice coming out from the speaker of his watch. Gene, how is the situation going for you? Hoo. Exhaling, Gene stared at the ground beneath him where two bodies slowly turned into particles. Raising his wrist near his mouth, he coldly said. Done. After a short pause, Ren's voice could be heard echoing from the speaker of his watch. All right, good job. We are done on our side too. MH. Click. Turning off his watch and staring at the post-apocalyptic world before him, after a couple of seconds, Gene slowly saw it crumble before his eyes. Thereafter a blue text appeared in front of him. Congratulations, your team has successfully inserted the code, you win. Staring at the blue text for a couple of seconds, clenching his teeth, a curse escaped from his mouth.
shh.
*T. Although he won, Gene wasn't happy. In fact, he felt repulsed by the blue text before him. This just didn't feel right to him. Before, whenever he won, he felt thrilled. Beating his opponents alone with his absolute strength felt thrilling to him. Alone. Yes, he had always done things alone before. He had always crushed his opponents through brute strength and by himself. Why did he suddenly change? Since when had he started working with others? Why couldn't he just directly crush his opponents like before instead of resorting to some petty strategy or scheme? Clenching onto his clothes tightly, Gene gnashed his teeth. What was this feeling he was experiencing? How disgusting.